There are small moments that nobody records, that nobody photographs, that happen in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday with no audience worth mentioning, and no reason to expect they will amount to anything at all. And then there are the ones that do. This is the story of Adrienne Okafor, and the Tuesday morning at a bank counter in Atlanta that changed the direction of everything. Not because she planned it that way, but because she was simply the kind of person who helps. The First National branch on Peachtree Street was busy at 1017 on a Tuesday in November. The kind of busy that a mid-morning bank operates at consistently and without drama. I queue at 3 of the 4 service windows. A financial advisor visible through a glass partition speaking to a young couple about something that required a lot of nodding. A security guard near the door who had perfected the particular art of being alert and invisible simultaneously. Adrienne was in the queue behind an older woman who was having trouble at the counter. The woman was perhaps 74, 75. She was neatly dressed, a pale blue coat, a handbag held carefully with both hands. The particular posture of a woman who had been taught a long time ago that how you carried yourself in public was a form of self-respect and had not forgotten the lesson. She was trying to complete a withdrawal transaction, and the difficulty was that she could not immediately locate the account reference number she needed, and her hands were trembling slightly as she sorted through the documents in her bag. The branch manager, a man named Todd Graves, had been helping her for approximately 6 minutes when Adrienne arrived at the back of the queue. She watched what unfolded next from a distance of about 12 feet. Todd looked at his watch. He looked at the queue behind the woman. He looked at his watch again. Then he turned toward a colleague at the adjacent window and said, in a voice calibrated to carry without technically being loud, "Can someone else handle the walk-ins? I cannot afford to spend 40 minutes on a simple withdrawal today." He said it while the woman was still standing at his counter, still sorting through her documents, still trying. The woman's hand still for a moment. She looked up from her bag. Something in her expression, not hurt exactly, but the specific recognition of a person who's been told, without words, that their time matters less than someone else's, settled into something that Adrienne, watching from the queue, understood immediately and completely. She stepped out of the line. She walked to the counter. She stood beside the woman, not in front of her, beside her, and she said quietly, "Can I help you find what you are looking for?" The woman looked at her. Adrienne reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small packet of tissues, her grandmother's habit, absorbed without noticing, carried in every coat she owned, and held one out because the woman's eyes had gone slightly bright at the edges in a specific way that has nothing to do with crying and everything to do with the relief of being seen. The woman took it. She said, "Thank you." Then they sorted through the documents together. Adrienne asked the right questions, not too many, not phrased in a way that makes an older person feel managed. She found what was needed. She handed it to Todd, who processed the transaction in 4 minutes. The woman thanked the teller, tucked her documents back into her handbag with both hands, and turned to Adrienne before she left. She said, "What is your name, sweetheart?" Adrienne told her. The woman looked at her for a moment, longer than a passing exchange would require. Then she nodded once, the way you nod at something you've decided to remember, and walked to the door. Adrienne went back to the queue. Adrienne Okafor had grown up in Decatur, Georgia, the granddaughter of a woman named Edith who had run a small alteration shop in the front room of her house for 41 years and who had held a consistent position about how people ought to be treated that she communicated less through speeches and more through the accumulation of small, specific, unrequested acts of care. The neighbor's groceries carried without being asked, the child whose shoelace was untied, the stranger at the bus, stop who needed an umbrella. Edith had kept a packet of tissues in her coat pocket every day of her adult life because, she said, you could not always predict when someone would need one, and it cost nothing to be prepared. Adrienne had kept a packet in her own coat pocket since she was 19 years old. She had used them in circumstances ranging from the expected to the completely unanticipated. She did not think of it as a grand principle. She thought of it as something her grandmother would have done. She worked as a project analyst at a mid-sized logistics firm in Atlanta's Midtown district. She was good at her job, known among her colleagues for a particular combination of thoroughness and warmth that made her effective in client-facing situations. And she had been considering, for the past 6 months, whether it was time to look for a role that matched where her skills had taken her. She had not yet done anything decisive about this consideration. She thought about it occasionally on the drive home. She thought about it on the Tuesday evening after the bank, sitting in traffic on the connector, replaying nothing specific about the morning, just the particular texture of the older woman's expression in the moment before she took the tissue, the relief in it, how small the gesture had been, and how much it had apparently mattered. She mentioned the incident to a friend over dinner that week. Her friend asked if she had expected anything to come of it. Adrienne said, "I did not help her because I expected anything from it. I helped her because she reminded me of my grandmother. And my grandmother always said that kindness without an audience is the only kind that counts." Her friend nodded. They moved on to other topics. The woman's name, which Adrienne did not know and had not asked for, was Constance Whitfield. Constance had been a high school English teacher in Memphis for 36 years before retiring to Atlanta to be closer to her son. She was 74 years old, as sharp and precise as she had ever been, and she had spent the past several weeks visiting various financial institutions in the Peachtree Street corridor on an informal and entirely unannounced basis, observing, because her son had asked her to keep her eyes open, in her own way at her own pace, with no pressure and no specific criteria, how those institutions treated the people who used them. Her son, Franklin Whitfield, was the CEO of Meridian Financial Group. Meridian Financial Group had acquired the first national branch on Peachtree Street 14 months earlier. Franklin ran 12 acquired branches across the Southeast and was in the process of evaluating which of them merited the additional investment required to move them from adequate to genuinely excellent. Part of that evaluation, the part that no consulting firm could provide and that Franklin had learned over 16 years of running businesses, was the most reliable indicator of a branch's actual culture, was how the branch treated ordinary people on ordinary days when nobody important was watching. He had asked his mother to be his eyes. She called him on Tuesday evening, after dinner, from the small armchair in her living room where she made most of her important calls. She told him about the branch on Peachtree Street. She described what had happened at the counter. She described Todd Graves, the watch, the comment to a colleague, the particular quality of dismissal that is worse in some ways than open rudeness because it treats a person as an inconvenience rather than an injustice. Then she told him about the young woman in the queue. She mentioned the tissue first. She was specific about it, that the young woman had not reached for it after the situation was resolved or at the end of the interaction, but in the middle of it, when it was most needed, before she had even finished helping. Constance had been an English teacher for 36 years, and she understood the grammar of small gestures better than most people. She told Franklin the young woman's name was Adrienne Okafor. She had asked, before she left the branch, if anyone knew where the young woman worked. The teller who had processed Constance's withdrawal, a young man who had watched everything that happened and said nothing about it at the time, had told her quietly, on her way out, that he thought she worked at one of the logistics firms up on Midtown. Franklin said, "And the branch manager?" Constance said, "His name badge said Todd Graves." By the following Thursday, Franklin Whitfield had visited the Peachtree Street branch in person. Todd was at his desk when the branch director appeared at his office door with an expression that conveyed, in the compressed language of institutional hierarchy, that what was about to happen required his full and immediate attention. Todd followed the branch director to the small meeting room at the back, where a man he had seen on 2 all-staff memos sat at the table. Franklin said, "Mr. Graves, do you recall a customer last Tuesday, an older woman, mid-70s, pale blue coat, having some difficulty with her documents at your counter?" Todd's expression moved through recognition, then calculation, then a specific recalibration that arrives when a person begins to understand, too late and in the wrong order, that what they are looking at is not what they thought they were looking at. He said, "There was a customer, yes. The queue was quite long that morning and I..." Franklin said, "She is my mother." He let that sit in the room for a long moment. Then he said, "I am going to ask you about the comment you made to your colleague while she was still standing at your counter. I would like you to think carefully before you answer." The branch review was formally open within the week. It examined not only the specific incident, but the broader pattern of service decisions made under Todd's management, a pattern that the review documented in language that was precise, professional, and that left very little room for interpretation. His contract was not renewed. Meanwhile, Franklin had asked his executive assistant to find Adrienne Okafor. A call was placed at her office the following Monday morning. Adrienne listened. She said very little during the call itself. When it was over, she sat at her desk for a long moment and looked at the Atlanta skyline through the window. The following week, she visited Meridian Financial Group's headquarters on West Peachtree Street. She met with Franklin Whitfield and 2 members of his executive team for an hour and 15 minutes. The conversation was the most straightforward professional exchange she had ever been part of. No performance required, no impression to manage. Simply a discussion between people who all understood what the conversation was actually about. Franklin was looking for a senior client relations lead for his Southeast Operations Division. The role required someone who understood both the analytical and human dimensions of client-facing work, who had the instinct to read a situation accurately and respond to what it actually needed rather than what it appeared to need. and who did not require an audience in order to do the right thing. He said that last part specifically. He had thought about how to phrase it and decided the most direct way was the most accurate. Adrienne said, "Your mother mentioned the tissue." Franklin said, "My mother mentions a tissue every time she tells a story." She accepted the role 3 weeks later. The Meridian Financial Group Southeast Division also moved its $180 million operating account back from a competitor it had been evaluating, citing a revised assessment of service culture at the Peachtree Street branch under new interim management. On a Tuesday evening in December, Constance Whitfield sat in a small armchair in her Atlanta living room with a cup of tea and the particular stillness of a woman who has reached the age at which the most important things reveal themselves to have been the smallest ones all along. She thought about a Tuesday morning at a bank counter, about a young woman who had stepped out of a queue without being asked, who had stood beside a stranger rather than in front of her, and who had reached into her coat pocket for a tissue at exactly the moment it was most needed. She had taught English for 36 years. She knew that a story's meaning was rarely located in its largest event. She picked up her cup. She drank her tea. She just helped. If the story stayed with you, share it with someone who still believes that small acts of kindness without an audience are the ones that matter most. And tell me in the comments, who do you think deserves more credit? Adrienne for the kindness or Constance for making sure it was remembered? I will see you in the next story.